In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
No question is more confused in France than the question of work. No relation is more disfigured than the one between the French and work. Go to Andalusia, Algeria, or Naples, and they despise work profoundly. And go to Germany, to the United States, to Japan, they revere work. Things are changing. It's true. There are plenty of otaku in Japan, Froha Arbestilos in Germany, and workaholics in Andalusia. But for the time being, these are only curiosities. In France, we get down on all fours to climb the ladders of hierarchy, but privately flatter ourselves that we don't really give a shit. We stay at work until 10 o'clock in the evening when we're swamped, but we've never had any scruples about stealing office supplies here and there, or carting off the inventory in order to resell it later. We hate bosses, but we want to be employed at any cost. To have a job is honor, yet working is a sign of servility. In short, the perfect clinical illustration of hysteria. We love while hating, and we hate while loving. And we all know the stupor and confusion that strike the hysteric when he loses his victim, his master. More often than not, he does not get over it. This neurosis is based on which successive governments could declare war on joblessness, claiming to wage an unemployment battle, while ex-managers camped with their cell phones in Red Cross shelters along the banks of the Seine, while the Department of Labor was massively manipulating its statistics in order to bring unemployment numbers below 2 million, while welfare checks and drug dealings were the only guarantees, as the French state has recognized, against the possibility of a social explosion at any minute. It is the psychic economy of the French as much as the political stability of the country that is at stake. The maintenance of their workerist fiction. Excuse us if we don't give a fuck.
The Abracast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
Surviving manufactured mob violence in the steel buckle of the Rust Belt. Recording in the hardened bunker deep beneath the Stigmata Studios building. I am John Towers, and this is the Abracast. So we're continuing on with this is the most poignant book I could be doing right now in the light of what's going on in Seattle. So, Seattle, a bunch of anarchists took over 7 blocks of Seattle, and they seceded, and they renamed it the Auto Zone. No, the Autonomous Zone. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. And they're sending messages out to other anarchists, asking them to bring their firearms and defend their block. They're, I'm sure, just causing havoc with the people living in the area. And the city the city gave up their police precinct. They just left. I mean, can you fucking believe this? I feel like I'm in between a chapter of Atlas Shrugged or something. I'm looking around. I can't believe it. I'm pretty close to saying that everything that's happened in 2020 is been engineered. I'm not saying that. I'm pretty close to saying it. It's pretty close. Anyhow, so we started this. It's the most sinister book we've ever done. It's this little blue sinister piece of shit called The Coming Insurrection, and it's written by the Invisible Committee, which are a bunch of French anarchists, anarcho-communists, I would say. So we did the first couple. It's organized in mostly called circles, and the cold open was the beginning of the third circle, which is what's it entitled? Life, health, and love are precarious. Why should work be an exception? So, and this series here is going to be a great companion piece to that the Paris Commune episode that I did a month or two back. And also it's got me looking at Paris 1968, and like the parallels between 2020 and 1968 are amazing. And if anyone would like to get some kind of data together on the to compare and contrast, I would be willing to work with you to present that information. I just don't have time to do it. My whole life is falling apart right now. But yeah, it's definitely worth looking at with the Democrat convention coming up, the rocket launches. There's mirrored rocket launches in 1968 and 2020. It's worth looking at. I'm not going to get into it off the top of my head. Obviously, I'm not prepared for that. But I thought I'd put the call out there for you. We got a new Patreon supporter. Grant, here's to you, buddy. Thank you very much for your help. And everybody out there, raise your glass to the Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters of our show here. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. With that being said, those of you who are getting the Water of the Art from the Water of the Art operation, I'm getting boxes together. I'm getting ready to start sending that stuff out. So if you're waiting for your wizard water, just hang tight. It'll be there soon. With that being said, also tarot cards are available. I forgot to mention that the last couple episodes. If you go to advertise.com to the store section, it's got its own little tab there, tarot cards. Because of the pandemic, the printer is really slow with their fulfillment. From what I understand is they are not nearly as slow when everything is back to normal. So hopefully those guys are being safe and they'll send these fucking cards out soon. All right, let's get to it. Let's get to this sinister little blue book here. Wait, what are you looking at? Yes, surviving mob violence. I'm telling you, that's my jam. It's funny because I started thinking about it and I was like, oh, I actually have survived a lot of mob violence in my life. Now I'm not going to tell any of the stories. Okay. Lots of it. I mean, disproportionate amount of mob violence. Pointed at the kid here. Back of this book. Okay. We belong to a generation that lives very well in this fiction. That has never counted on either a pension or the right to work, let alone rights at work. This isn't even precarious, as the most advanced factions of the militant left like to theorize, because to be precarious is still to define oneself in relation to the sphere of work. That is, to its decomposition. We accept the necessity of finding money, by whatever means, because it's currently impossible to do without it. But we reject the necessity of working. Besides, we don't work anymore. We do our time, and business is not a place where we exist. It's just a place we pass through. We aren't cynical. We are just unwilling to be deceived. All these discourses on motivation, quality, personal investment pass us by. To the great dismay of personal managers, they say we are disappointed by business, that it failed to honor our parents' loyalty, that it let them go too quickly. They are lying. To be disappointed, one must have hoped for something. We have had never hoped for anything from business. We see it for what it is and for what it has always been, a fool's game of varying degrees of comfort. With regard to our parents, our only regret is that they fell into the trap, at least the ones who believed. The sentimental confusion that surrounds the question of work can be explained thus. The notion of work has always included two contradictory dimensions, a dimension of exploitation and a dimension of participation. The exploitation of individual and collective labor power through the private or social appropriation of surplus value, participation in a common effort through the relations linking those who cooperate in the universe of production. We control the means of production. These two dimensions are perversely confused in the notion of work, which explains workers' indifference at the end of the day to both Marxist rhetoric, which denies the dimension of participation, and managerial rhetoric, which denies the dimension of exploitation, hence the ambivalence to the relation of work, which is shameful insofar as it makes us strangers to what we are doing. At the same time, adored insofar as a part of ourselves is brought into play. The disaster has already occurred. It resides in everything that had to be destroyed, in all those who had been uprooted, in order for work to end up as the only way of existing. The horror of work is less in the work itself, in the methodical ravaging for centuries of all that isn't work, the familiarities of one's neighborhood and trade, of one's village, of struggle, of kinship, our attachment to places, to beings, to the seasons, to the way of doing and speaking. Here lies the present paradox. Work has totally triumphed over all other ways of existing. At the same time as workers have become superfluous, gains in productivity, outsourcing, mechanization, automated and digital production have also progressed, so that they have almost reduced to zero the quantity of living labor necessary to manufacture of any product. We are living the paradox of a society of workers without work, where entertainment, consumption, and leisure only underscore the lack from which they are supposed to distract us. The mine at Carmu, famous for a century of violent strikes, has now been converted into Cape Discovery. It is an entertainment, quote, multiplex, unquote, for skateboarding and biking, distinguished by a mining museum in which methane blasts are simulated for vacationers. Corporations' work is divided as an increasingly visible way into highly skilled positions of research, conception, control, coordination, and communication, which deploy all the knowledge necessary for the new cybernetic production process, and unskilled positions for the maintenance and monitoring of this process. The first are few in number and very well paid, thus so coveted that the minority who occupy these positions will do anything to avoid losing them. And their work are effectively bound in one anxious embrace. Managers, scientists, lobbyists, researchers, programmers, developers, consultants, and engineers literally never stop working. Podcasters, you can add that to this list too. Even their sex lives serve to augment productivity. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, dog. Gotta punch the clock. Okay, even their sex lives serve to augment productivity. A human resource philosopher writes, the most creative businesses are the ones with the greatest number of intimate relations. Business associates, Adilmar Benz, human resource manager, confirms, are an important part of business's capital. They need the D. Their motivations, their know-how, their capacity to innovate, and their attention to clients' desires constitute the raw material of innovative services. Their behavior, their social and emotional competence are a growing factor in the evaluation of their work. This will no longer be evaluated in the terms of numbers of hours on the job, but on the basis of objectives obtained and quality results. They are entrepreneurs. The series of tasks that can't be delegated to automation form a nebulous cluster of positions that, because they cannot be occupied by machines, are occupied by old human warehousemen, stock people, assembly line workers, seasonal workers, etc. This is flexible, undifferentiated workforce that moves from one task to the next and never stays long in a business, can no longer consolidate itself as a force, being outside the center of production process and employed to plug the holes of what what has not yet been mechanized, as if pulverized in a multitude of intricacies. The temp is the figure of the worker who is no longer a worker, who no longer has a trade but other abilities that he sells where he can. And those very abilities is also a kind of work. So as much shit as this book talks, this is an actual real thing. And I actually have a little bit of experience with this. I've mentioned a bunch of times on the show before that I used to make my living working security for, various sports teams. So what happens is the company that I work for has a contract with, we'll just say, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, they had a contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. This goes back as far as through River Stadium before PNC Park was here and before Heinz Field was here. So what they would do is they would sit down and they would have some kind of like security assessment or something. They'd figure out how many living bodies they need, how many warm bodies they need to, quote, secure the building, unquote. That's people guarding access doors, people guarding this and that, and the people watching the stands, and people running command posts, and people working the field, and people on the different seating levels, people responding to radio calls, people people working the gates, nowadays running the metal detectors or whatever they have, wands, whatever. And so what our company was in charge of was to fill that number, and it's all about billable hours. So you wind up getting like I don't want to, I believe every person has potential, but a lot of times what we wind up getting is kind of like the lowest common denominator of people. Like I don't know if it was understood or what the deal was, but it's like, hey, just sit here and make sure no one goes through this door. Well, what if someone tries to go through the door? Just try to stop them. Okay. And that's their job. Literally, their job is their body just sitting there or standing there in that case. I just thought it was interesting because I had like such a specific example of what they're talking about here. And then obviously you have people that are there for more than just being a warm body, and those people are the people that wind up advancing and getting the more exotic and fun, jobs. Okay. On the margins of this workforce that is effective and necessary for the functioning of the machine is a growing majority that has become superfluous. That is certainly useful to the flow of production, but not much else, which introduces the risk that in its idleness it will set about sabotaging the machine. The menace of the general demobilization is the specter that haunts the present system of production. Not everybody responds to the question, why work, in the same way as this ex-welfare recipient. For my well-being, I have to keep myself busy. There is a serious risk that we will all end up finding a good use for our very idleness. This floating population must somehow be kept occupied, but to this day, they have not found a better disciplinary method than wages. It's therefore necessary to pursue the dismantling of social gains, so that the most restless ones, those who only surrender when faced with the alternative of dying of hunger or stagnating in jail, are lured back to the bosom of wage labor. The burgeoning slave trade in personal services must continue. Cleaning, catering, massage, domestic nursing, prostitution, tutoring, therapy, psychological aid, etc. This is accompanied by the continual raising of the standards of security, hygiene, control, and culture, and by accelerated recycling of fashions, all of which establish the need for such services. In Rouen, we now have human parking meters, people who wait around on the streets and deliver your parking slip. And if it's raining, we'll even rent you an umbrella. The order of work was the order of a world. This evidence of its ruin is paralyzing to those who dread what will come after. Today, work is tied less to the economic necessity of producing goods than to the political necessity of producing producers and consumers, and of preserving by any means necessary the order of work. Producing oneself is becoming the dominant occupation of a society where production no longer has an object, like a carpenter who has been evicted from his shop and in desperation sets about hammering and sawing himself. All these young people smiling at their job interviews, who have their teeth whitened to give them an edge, who go to nightclubs to boost their company's spirit, who learn English to advance their careers, who get divorced or married to move up the ladder, who take courses in leadership and practice self-improvement in order to better manage conflicts. The most intimate self-improvement, says one guru, will lead to an increased emotional stability, to smother, and the more open relationships, to sharper intellectual focus, and therefore to a better economic performance. This swarming little crowd that waits impatiently to be hired while doing whatever it can to seem natural is the result of an attempt to rescue the order of work through an ethos of mobility. To be mobilized is to relate to work, not to an activity, but to a possibility. If the unemployed person removes his piercings and goes to the barber and keeps himself busy with projects, if he really works on his employability, as they say, it's because this is how he demonstrates his mobility. Mobility is the higher detachment from self. This minimal disconnection from what constitutes us, this condition of strangeness whereby the self can now be taken up as an object of work, and it now becomes possible to sell one's self rather than one's labor power, to be remunerated not for what he does but for what one is. Expand your brand. for our exquisite mastery of social codes, for our relational talents, for our smile and our way of presenting ourselves. This is the new standard of socialization. Mobility brings about a fusion of the two contradictory poles of work. Here, we participate in our own exploitation, and all the participation is exploited. Ideally, you are yourself a little business, your little boss, your little product. Whether one is working or not is a question of generating contacts, abilities, networking, and short, human capital. The planetary injunction to mobilize at the slightest pretext. Cancer, terrorism, an earthquake, the homeless, I would like to add, a pandemic. I would like to add manufactured riots and mob violence. It sums up the reigning power's determination to maintain the reign of work beyond its physical disappearance. The present production apparatus is therefore, on one hand, a gigantic machine for psychic and physical mobilization, for sucking the energy of the humans that have become superfluous, and on the other hand, a sorting machine that allocates survival to a compliant subjectivities, and rejects all problem individuals, all those who embody another use of life, and in this way resist the machine. On the other hand, ghosts are brought to life, and on the other, the living are left to die. This is the properly political function of the contemporary production apparatus, to organize beyond and against work, to collectively desert the regime of mobility, to demonstrate the existence of a vitality and a discipline precisely in demobilization, is a crime for which a civilization on its knees is not about to forgive us. In fact, although it is the only way to survive it.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that, plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Speak the charm of make.
Wizards, Freemasons, astrology, tarot. Find all this and more at the Arnemancy Podcast. Host Reverend Eric, that's me, interviews scholars, authors, and eccentric occult personalities diving into a wide range of esoteric topics. Find the Arnemancy Podcast at arnemancy.com or anywhere that podcasts are distributed. That's arnemancy.com. ARNEMANCY. Arnemancy.com.
I was thinking about editorializing and adding my own thoughts to this whole third circle work business, but I think I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. I mean, it's not the way that I envision work. You know, I don't know. So the fourth circle this is going to be another fun one. The fourth circle is more simple, more fun, more mobile, and more secure. We have heard enough about the city and the country, and particularly about the supposed ancient opposition between the two. From up close or from afar, what surrounds us looks nothing like that. It is one single urban cloth, without form or order, a bleak zone, endless and undefined, a global continuum of a museum-like hypercenters and natural parks, of enormous suburban housing developments and massive agricultural projects, industrial zones and subdivisions, country inns and trendy bars, the metropolis, Certainly an ancient city existed, as did the cities of medieval and modern times, but there is no such thing as a metropolitan city. All territory is subsumed by the metropolis. Everything occupies the same space, if not geographically, then through an intermeshing of its networks. It is because the city has finally disappeared that it has now become fetishized as history. The factory buildings of Lille become concert halls. The rebuilt concrete core of Le Havre is now UNESCO, the World Heritage Sire. In Beijing, the hutongs surround the Forbidden City were demolished and replaced by fake versions placed a little farther out on display for sightseers. In Troyes, they paste half-timber facades on the cinder block buildings, a type of pastiche that resembles the Victorian shops at Disneyland Paris. More than anything, the old historic centers, once hotbeds of revolutionary sedition, are now wisely integrated into the organizational diagram of the metropolis. They've been given over to tourism and conspicuous consumptions. There are fairy tale commodity islands propped up for their expos and their decorations, and by force if necessary. The oppressive sentimentality of every Christmas village is offset by more security guards and city patrols. Control has a wonderful way of integrating itself into the commodity landscape, showing its authoritarian face to anyone who wants to see it. In an age of fusions of Muzak, telescoping police batons, and cotton candy, equal parts police surveillance and enchantment. So this bit here reminds me, I haven't watched it forever, but one of my favorite movies of all time is, do you know what I'm going to say? Fight Club. I love Fight Club. I like Fight Club because I view it as a Gnostic tale. And I'm never going to sit down and do a Gnostic Fight Club episode. It's just not going to happen. But there's a politics. There is a political aspect to Fight Club. It's obvious there is, right? And when Tyler is ranting, I think it's after they get in a car wreck and Tyler's talking to the narrator. And his voice is like becoming like, it's all dreamy because the narrator is like in and out. But Tyler Durden's explaining to him that one day we will wear the same pair of leather pants for our whole lives, and the ives that'll stretch up to the skyscrapers will be used for this and that and the other thing. That's what this block of text here from the fourth circle sounds like to me. And you're like, well, yeah, I mean, it's obvious Tyler Durden was an anarchist, right? And that's what I'm saying. So it's interesting. Sometimes I just stop the show just to point out what flashes across my brain when I read stuff, and that's just one of these kind of things. This is a taste for the authentic and for the control that goes with it, accompanies the pretty bourgeoisie in its colonization of the working class neighborhoods. Pushed out of the city centers, they find on the frontiers like a kind of neighborhood feeling they missed in their prefab houses of suburbia. By chasing out the poor people, the cars, and the immigrants, by making it tidy and getting rid of all the germs. The pretty bourgeoisie wipes out every little thing it came looking for. A police officer and a garbage man shake hands in a picture on a town billboard, and the slogan reads, Montauban, a clean city. Here's another thing that just flashed across my subconscious is, you want me to stop reading anything? I mean, not for the show, but like anything in real life, put the word bourgeoisie in it. Automatic turn off. The only one I can think that turns me off more than that is the dear white people. When you start something out by going, dear white people, automatically tuned out. If you're legitimately trying to engage me as a white person, zoned out. The other thing is, like if a little kid goes, we need to have a talk. Anyone that says, we need to have a talk, it's I hear whoever is delivering the message, I just hear the SJW writer behind it. We need to have a talk. Okay. It's problematic what you're doing. It's whatever we need to have a talk. People, and they never want to talk. It's all a monologue. They don't ever want to talk. They want to talk and they want you to listen. It's not like talk like a dialogue. Dear white people, we need to have a talk. That might be racy to say in this day and age. Back to the book. I'm hiding, but I'm gonna run and hide behind crazy anarcho-communists. The same sense of decency that obliged urbanists to stop speaking of the city, which they destroyed, instead of to talk of the urban, should compel them to also drop country, since it no longer exists. The uprooted and stressed out masses are instead shown a countryside, a vision of the past that's easy to stage now that the country folk have been so depleted. It is a marketing campaign deployed on a territory in which everything must be valorized. Ooh, I like that. Or reconstituted as national heritage. Well, that's no good anymore. National heritage doesn't count. Burn it. Everywhere is the same chilling void reaching into even the most remote and rustic corners. The metropolis is this simulated death of a city and a country. It is the crossroads where all the petty bourgeoisie come together in the middle of this middle class that stretches out indefinitely, as much a result of rural flight as of urban sprawl. To cover the planet with glass would fit perfectly to the cynicism of contemporary architecture. A school, a hospital, or a media center, of all variations of the same theme. Transparency, neutrality, uniformity. I would add equity. These massive fluid buildings are conceived without any need to know what they will house. They could be here as much as anywhere else. What to do with all the office towers at La Défense in Paris? The apartment blocks of Lyons Les Partadous, or the shopping complexes of Eurelili. The expression flambant neuf perfectly captures their destiny. Flambeau neuf means literally flaming new, the French equivalent of the English brand new, or the American brand fucking spanking new, motherfucker. A Scottish traveler testifies to the unique attraction of the power of fire, speaking after rebels had burned the rebels had burned the Hotel de Ville in Paris, May 1871. Never could I have imagined anything so beautiful. It's superb. I won't deny that the people of the commune are frightful rogues, but what artists! And they were not even aware of their own masterpiece. I've seen the ruins of Amalfi bathed in the azure swells of the Mediterranean, and the ruins of Tunghur temples in Punjab. I've seen Rome and many other things, but nothing can compare to what I feasted my eyes upon tonight. He's talking about the Paris Commune. If you're interested in this and you want to get a little bit of context for the world that's fucking around you right now, go listen to the Paris Commune episode. You can find it on the feature topic links at Advertise.com. There still remains some fragments of the city and some traces of the country caught up in the metropolitan mesh, where the vitality has taken up quarters in the so-called problem neighborhoods. It's a paradox that the places thought to be the most uninhabitable turn out to be the only ones still in some ways inhabited. The old squatted shack still feels more lived in than the so-called luxury apartments where it is only possible to set down the furniture and get the decor just right while waiting for the next move. Within many of today's megalopsises, the shanty towns are the last living and the livable areas. Also, of course, the most deadly. They are the flip side of the electronic decor of the global metropolis. The dormitory towers in the suburbs north of Paris, abandoned by a pretty bourgeoisie that went off hunting or for swimming pools, has been brought back to life by mass unemployment and now radiate more energy than the Latin Quarter. In other words, much as fire. The conflagration of November 2005 was not a result in extreme dispossession, as it is often portrayed. It was, on the contrary, a complete possession of a territory. People can burn cars because they are pissed off. So that whole thing that I did at the beginning of the episode about the Capitol Hill AutoZone Center, here we go. I'm gonna start this paragraph over again, not for your benefit, but for my benefit. I know that you get it. You just heard it, what I did, but I want to do it again. The conflagration of November 2005 was not a result of extreme dispossession. It is, as it is often portrayed, it was, on the contrary, a complete possession of a territory. People can burn cars because they're pissed off. But to keep the riots going for a month while keeping the police in check, to do that, you have to know how to organize. You have to establish complexities. You have to know the terrain perfectly and share a common language and a common enemy. Mile after mile and week after week, the fire spread and new blazes responded to the original ones appearing. They were there, least expected. The grapevine can't be wiretapped. The metropolis is a terrain of constant low-intensity conflict in which the taking of Basra, Mogadishu, or Nablus marks point of culmination. For a long time, the city was a place for the military to avoid, or if anything, to besiege. But the metropolis is perfectly compatible with war. Armed conflict is only a moment in its constant reconfiguration. The battles conducted by the great powers resemble a kind of never-ending police campaign. In the black holes of the metropolis, whether in Burkina Faso, in the South Bronx, oh boy, here we go, in Kamagoski, in Chipas, or in La Courneuve, no longer undertaken in the view of victory or peace, or even reestablishment of order. Such interventions continue a security operation that is always already in progress. War is no longer a distinct event in time, but instead it diffracts into a series of micro operations, both military and police, to ensure security. The police and the army are evolving in parallel and in lockstep. A criminologist requests that the National Riot Police reorganize itself into small, professionalized mobile units. The military academy, cradle of disciplinary methods, is rethinking its own hierarchical organizations for its infantry battalions. A NATO officer employs a participatory method that involves everyone in the analysis of preparation, execution, and evaluation of action. The plan is considered to to be considered and reconsidered for days, right through the training phase. And according to the latest intelligence, there is nothing like group planning for building team cohesion and morale. The armed forces didn't simply adapt themselves to the metropolis, they produced it. Thus, since the Battle of Nablus, Israeli soldiers have become interior designers, forced by Palestinian guerrillas to abandon the streets, which had become too dangerous. They learned to advance vertically and horizontally into the heart of the urban architecture, poking holes in the walls and the ceilings in order to move through them. An officer in the Israeli Defense Force and a graduate of philosophy explains the enemy interprets space in a traditional classical manner, and I do not want to obey this interpretation and fall into his traps. I want to surprise him. This is the essence of war. I need to win. This is why we opt for the methodology of moving through walls like a worm that eats its way forward. Urban space is more than just the theater of confrontation. It is also the means. This echoes the advice of Blackwary, who recommended in this case for the party of insurrection. That is the future insurgents of Paris, to take the houses on the barricaded streets to protect their positions. They should bore holes in the walls to allow passage between houses. They should break down the ground floors, stairwells, poke holes into the ceiling and defend themselves against potential attackers, and rip out the doors and use them to barricade windows and turn each door into a gun turret. The metropolis is not just this urban pileup, this final collision between city and country. It is also a flow of beings, the things, a current that runs through the fiber optic network, through high-speed train lines, the satellites, the video surveillance cameras, making sure that this world keeps running straight to its ruin. It is a current that would like to drag everything along in its hopeless mobility, to mobilize each and every one of us. That this is going to be key as we go and as we're talking about this in real life, not just this little blue sinister book. I'm going to read it again for me, not for you. I'm going to read it again. It is a current that would like to drag everything along with its hopeless mobility, to mobilize each and every one of us, where information pummels us like some kind of hostile force, where the only thing left to do is run, where it becomes hard to wait, even for an umpteenth subway train. With the proliferation of means of movement and communications, and with the lure of always being elsewhere, there's continuously torn from here and now, hop on an intercity or commuter train, pick up a telephone in order to be already gone. Such mobility only never means uprootedness, isolation, exile. It would be insufferable if it weren't always the mobility of private space. If a portable interior, the private bubble doesn't burst, it floats around. The process of cocooning. Cocooning is not only going away, it is merely being put into motion. From a train station to an office park to a commercial bank, from one hotel to another, there is everywhere a foreignness, a feeling so banal and so habitual it becomes the last form of familiarity. Metropolitan excess is the capricious mixing of definite moods, indefinitely recombined. The city centers of the metropolis are not clones of themselves, but offer instead their own auras. We glide from one to the next, selecting this one, rejecting that one, to the tune of a kind of existential shopping trip among different styles of bars, peoples, designs, and playlists. With my MP3 player, I'm the master of my world. To cope with the uniformity that surrounds us, to our option, it is constantly renovate our own interior world, like a child who constructs the same little house over and over again, or like Robinson Crusoe reproducing his shopkeeper's universe on a desert island. Yet our desert island is a civilization itself, and there are billions of us continually washing up on it. It is precisely due to this architecture of flows that this metropolis is one of the most vulnerable human arrangements that has ever existed. Supple, subtle, and vulnerable. The brutal shutting down of borders to fend off a raging epidemic, a sudden interruption of supply lines, organized blockades of the axes of communication. The whole facade crumbles, a facade that can no longer mask the scenes of the carnage haunting it from morning to night. The world would not be moving so fast if it didn't have to constantly outrun its own collapse. The metropolis aims to shelter itself from the inevitable malfunction via the network structure, via its entire technological infrastructure of nodes and connections. Its decentralized architecture. The internet is said to be capable of surviving a nuclear attack. Permanent control of the flow of information. The flow of information. People and products make the mobility of the metropolis secure, while its tracking systems ensure that no shipping containers get lost and that not a single dollar is stolen in any transaction, and that no terrorist ends up on an airplane and thanks to an RFID chip, a biometric transport, a DNA profile. But the metropolis also produces the means of its own destruction. God damn it. The metropolis also produces a means of its own destruction. An American security expert claims the defeat in Iraq as a result of the guerrillas' ability to take advantage of new ways of communicating. So there's an app called Signal that encrypts your messages. I'm just saying. It encrypts your messages, bro. The U.S. invasion didn't so much import democracy to Iraq as it did cybernetic networks. They brought with them one of the weapons of their own defeat, the proliferation of mobile phones and our own defeat. What? The proliferation of mobile phones and internet access points gave the guerrillas newfound ways to self-organize and to allow them to become such elusive targets. Every network has its weak points, the nodes that must be undone in order to interrupt circulation, to unwind the web. The last great European electrical blackout proved it. In a single incident with a high-voltage wire, the good part of the continent was plunged into darkness in order for something to rise up in the midst of the metropolis and open up other possibilities. The first act must be to interrupt its perpetuum mobile. That is what the Thai rebels understood when they knocked out the electrical stations. That is what the French anti-CPE protesters, CPE, Contrat, Premier, oh boy, Imbatuit. I don't know what that means. Okay, but that's what the CPE protesters understood in 2006 when they shut down the universities with the review towards shutting down the entire economy. Look at that. Their goal was to shut down the entire economy. What have we been doing for the last 3 months, motherfuckers? That is what the American longshoremen understood when they struck in October 2002 in support of the 300 jobs blocking the main ports of the West Coast for 10 days. The American economy is so dependent on goods coming from Asia, read China, 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 that is the coast. The blockade was over $1 billion per day. Imagine what we just fucking did to ourselves, by the way, for those last 3-4 months. With 10,000 people, the largest economic power in the world can be brought to its knees. According to certain experts, if the action had lasted another month, it would have produced a recession in the United States and the economic nightmare in Southeast Asia. I'm John. This has been the Advertise. I hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
Hey, did you learn something? Did you laugh? Supporting me is a way for you to be a part of the Advertise and ensure its growth and sustainability. It also means I can create a normal schedule for shows and bonus shows, as well as the exclusive Fellowcraft episodes. By supporting the show, you are not only a listener, but you are a part of the show. You supporting the show gives me a way to offer fun rewards as a thank you for showing your appreciation and support for our projects. Do you have an idea for a reward that you don't see? Let me know. My supporters are my partners. I currently pay for you to listen to the Advertise. Not only do I pay the hosting bills out of my own pocket, I volunteer my time and talent to each and every episode of the Advertise. The price of books, the time and resources of reading and researching, the massive amounts of gin and tonic needed, the equipment it takes to record the shows, the time and resources it takes to create the bonus material, and the cost to maintain the internet presence. Is it worth your support? I don't know. I am proud of the Advertise, and I feel like I'm improving all the time. In addition to creating the show that you dig and that you are excited about, I also have a full-time commitment and other obligations. So why financial support? All of the supporters help me focus my time on the quality and development of the podcast. And what if you can't afford, $1 or $3 or $10 or whatever a month? Believe me, I get that. There are many degrees of support, but if you can't support the show financially, please consider leaving a 5-star rate and review on your preferred podcast app. And don't forget that you can sign into the mailing list and still unlock a lot of bonus content. Thank you. I cannot put into words how much it means to me that you listen to the show each time I post a new episode. Your feedback, support, and love of the stories that we talk about here is what keeps me going.